Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is Lee Smith. After 17 volumes of fiction, Lee Smith has changed directions and published a memoir, Dimestore, A Writer's Life. Please join me here at the Alabama Booksmith as I speak with novelist, now memoirist, Lee Smith. Lee, it is so nice to see you again.
I'm so glad to be here. How many times have I been here? 5 times.
I think 5
5
times.
times, yeah.
We have a. You don't need to write memoir. We have the story of your life in Bookmark.
Yes, you sure do.
Over
you sure
25
do.
or 30 years.
Yeah.
But the last time we did talk, we were in Montgomery. You were at the Alabama Book Festival.
Right.
2 springs ago, and you had a new book at the time, a novel, Guests on Earth.
Yes.
Which took place in Asheville and involved Zelda Fitzgerald.
And I was there for the
health.
International Fitzgerald
And you were.
Festival.
You
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
While we were talking, though, we drifted off into your book about Grundy, your hometown in Grundy, in most southwestern Virginia. And
Far southwest as you can go.
And then you fall into West Virginia? Or,
well, you fall into Kentucky.
Kentucky.
They're just like 12 miles from Kentucky and 10 miles from West Virginia.
That book, you did that with with a childhood friend.
Yes, who was the senior English teacher, and we used all of the senior high school students in English to interview the people who were, part of the downtown in Grundy before it was demolished, flooded, in order to widen the river and do this flood control project.
It flooded every once in a while, understood.
Oh my God, 9 major floods since 1929.
People must have been very sick of cleaning up in
It was
Grundy.
terrible. I mean, in my own memory particularly, they had the 20-year floods, they had the 37 flood, that I don't remember, but 57 and 77, I was there helping to clean up, each time. And Mama's whole house was destroyed, in addition to the Dimestore, in addition to the whole town. So it's amazing the town, as it was, lasted as long as it did, I think.
But it must have, having done the oral history with Miss Raines and having all those students run around and interview old timers and so on, it clearly put you back into a mode of thinking about your childhood. I mean, you could not
it did.
think about your childhood.
It did. I think maybe that was a necessary step.
It could have
in order for me to write this book, Dimestore.
I loved Dimestore.
Thank you.
There were, this is beneath all of us, but I will say it anyway. There were places in it where I laughed, and there were places in it when I damn near cried.
Oh,
and that is, and it. I thought it was a very brave book in the sense that there were things that were painful to talk about, and you went ahead and did it anyway.
Yeah, I just sort of thought I'd talk about all the really important things,
Right. It put me in mind, just as I was beginning your book, I was reading along, and I thought, in all those novels and short stories, how much of Lee's autobiography, how much of her life has a reader already learned?
Well, not much.
Not much.
No, not much. I mean, only in the sense that I've always been crazy about place and very informed about place. And so my mountain novels, my big Appalachian novels, certainly have to do with the place where I was born, which I then did lots of historical research and so on about. And then the book about going down the Mississippi River on the raft. Well, I did that, but in order to write a novel, I completely fictionalized the trip because we just had a good time, and that's not enough for a novel.
No.
You got to have conflict.
And if you were mentioning that the trip down the river, I mean, you and your buddies from Hollins had a raft constructed. You went down the Ohio and then into the Mississippi, sort of the opposite of Huck. I mean, you would have joined Huck at Cairo.
Yes, that's right. We started in Paducah, Kentucky. That's right.
You had a notion at one time that it was possible you would write a nonfiction book about your trip down the river.
Yeah.
But then you explored that a little bit and decided
not to. Then I
not
went
to.
and interviewed, I think, 5 or 6 of the women who had been on the raft. And honestly, they were all dying to talk. You know, I
Yeah.
thought they wouldn't tell me the real story of their lives, but no, everybody was just dying to talk. And I was realizing that these were things they probably wouldn't want in print. A number of them. And then that I would have to really talk about my own life. And I might not want to do that either. I was going through a painful divorce at the time and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I just thought, whoa, it's a lot easier to write fiction. And because you can, you know, have things happen as you want to have them happen, so you can make your thematic points and everything can be neatly arranged. Real life is very messy. And actually, the women that I did interview, every single one of them called me up later and said, well, you know, I wish you wouldn't put in such and such and such and such and such and such. So I think it was a good idea.
Oh, I do too.
It would have been really interesting, but I couldn't have done it without hurting feelings and, you know.
And so many moving parts. When you write your
Yeah.
memoir, you are writing about your own life, your own feelings, things that happened to you, things that you thought.
Yeah, yeah.
But imagine that you're writing about a dozen lives.
I know.
And they're not your life.
No, no. And one of the women has completely disappeared. I mean, there are all sorts of things to say there, but it's not mine to say, you know.
No, it's not your material.
It's not
so
my
to speak.
story. It's their stories. And I think I have always been able, in my writing, I think, to tell the truth better in fiction
Wow.
than nonfiction. So this is my first foray into nonfiction.
What, after 17 volumes of fiction and a few near misses, like The Last Girl, well,
Right.
like the book that would have not
Right,
been The Last
right,
Girl.
right.
What did turn the corner for you? What made you decide, okay, now it's time, I'm
Well,
going to write my story?
actually, Don, this was a very emotional moment for me. I was always very involved. I'm a writer, so much informed, as we have said, by place, and particularly the Appalachian place of my childhood. So I've been writing about my county and so on for years.
Sure.
And so when the decision was made to demolish the downtown, to widen the river and, you know, do all this, you know, move the town to higher ground and all this stuff, I went up there to cover it. I was covering it for the Washington Post. And I went up to see 55 stores blown up, including my father's Dimestore, where he had gone every day that I ever knew him in my lifetime, you know, where he had just lived and had his being. I mean, 56 years he ran that store. And so it was so emotional for me. It really was. And then several years later, even probably more emotional on top of that, was when they demolished my parents' home, which was the only house they ever had. They had built it. They lived in it for 65 years, you know, and until their deaths. You know, first mamas and then daddies, and so that was gone. And I couldn't even go that time. So I knew the day it was happening. And one thing that happened was the neighbors all got together right before, you know, these big machines came in and so on. And they went over and they got the door knocker down off the front door, which was an S, a big brass S, you know, for Smith. And then one of them had a hobby of woodworking, so he made a shadow box frame and sent it to me at my home in North Carolina. So this box arrives a few days after this whole thing had happened, and I open it, and there's the door knocker. And I wasn't expecting it at all, and I just burst into tears and cried for about 24 hours. And then, all of a sudden, I just started writing. Just wildly, just, you know, by hand as I always write, but just wildly, nonfiction, I mean, making word pictures of all the things that were gone. You know, every room in that house, every item in that house, everything about my mother and about my father. Yeah. And, you know, about my little writing house down by the river that he built and built back after every flood, and then about the Dimestore and about my grandparents' house, and just about everything, about the whole town. And I just started writing. And so there we have the book. And it's just this, somehow, I mean, you know, everybody loses the home of their childhood. But most of us lose it much more slowly. It's just
blown
very,
up.
no, it's not blown up. It's not so dramatic. And it just had a huge effect on me.
Well, over the years, you and I have been acquainted and talked many times about my childhood, your childhood. I always, and with you and with writers something like you, there's always a strong element of storytelling, and there is for you. But one of the things in this book that I had not ever heard you say before is that in the dime store, there was a place above where the office was, with a one-way glass, and you could look down and watch the customers who didn't know you were watching
all
them.
the time.
You couldn't hear them though, could you?
No, I could just watch them. But see, I went to the dime store. I was an older child. I mean, I was a little girl born to older parents late in life, and so I was always around the grown-ups. You know, I didn't have brothers and sisters and so on. So I went to the dime store all the time with Daddy, and I had a little job. I took care of the dolls and took care of the fish and took care of the Easter chickens and so on. And I had my own little typewriter up in the office, and there was this wonderful one-way glass window where we could look down. Anybody up in that office could look down and see all the aisles of the dime store, the whole dime store, everything everybody was doing. So I could see people, slapping their children, or embracing, or talking to each other,
or shoplifting.
One time I saw this woman get a big Philco radio. Remember those big Philco radios? And put it between her legs, under her big coat, and just go waddling out of the store like this, and I didn't ever tell. I just wanted to see if she'd make it, and she did. And if I'd told, my Daddy would have killed me, of course. Because, he didn't want people to be shoplifting Philco radios out of his store.
He would want you to tell him that you saw this.
He would. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
This is, of course, Alabama Public Television, and there is a segment of your life that we have talked about in the past, where you worked for the Tuscaloosa News, you lived in Tuscaloosa, you wrote, you had your boys, raised them as small children. But there's one thing about all of that we have never talked about. I'd never heard it before. When you were a little girl in Grundy, your mother sent you to Birmingham for periods of time in the summer to learn to be a lady?
To learn to be a lady.
What was that about?
From my Aunt Gay. Well, my mother had grown up on the eastern shore of Virginia in a very sort of down at the hills but aristocratic sort of family, and she was a real lady, and she came to Grundy all the way across the state to the Wild Mountains and married this wild mountaineer and his whole rowdy clan, and spent the rest of her life trying to civilize everyone. I mean, she was a home economics teacher, and she was trying to civilize them all, and including me. And the idea for me was to stop being such a tomboy and running those mountains like a little wild child, and turn me into a lady. And so she sent me to Birmingham, Alabama every summer for about 3 weeks to my Aunt Gay. This was Mary Gray Marshall and my Uncle Robert Marshall, who lived on 1772 Vestiview Lane. And we would go to dinners and lunches at the club, where I would learn how to sit and order and have good manners and just all sorts of other things involved in being a lady.
And there was
my
more
cousin
than one fork.
Judy from Demopolis came too, from the other side of the family, and Judy and I were both having the lady lessons. I'm afraid they didn't take, but they were a lot of fun.
Well, it's fun to think of you as a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old or whatever at the club learning your forks.
And I had my first little heels, when I was about 10. I think the lady lessons probably stopped at 11, after which I became incorrigible.
Well, it's got to be done by then, or it's not going to get done.
That's right.
Obviously, Hollins and Louis Rubin and your buddies at Hollins, I mean, it's always seemed to me that was the neonatal place for Lee Smith and Annie Dillard and the others.
Yeah.
We have never recovered from our experiences with Louis Rubin, have we? It shaped our lives.
No, we haven't. Yeah, he is a teacher, a mentor for so many people, and he really changed and just augmented and improved and enlarged so many lives, yours and mine and countless others.
I was reading along, and it said Louis Rubin, and then I can almost hear your voice on the page. It's kind of parenthetically, who invented Southern literature,
Right.
comma.
Yes, he did.
Well, he invented it conceptually.
Right. Yeah.
This is something we should be thinking about in this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not, there is a Faulkner, there is a Welty, but Lewis decided there was a Southern literature.
A sort of a school there. I mean, a sort of a collection.
Right.
So something particularly special about these people writing in this time and this place, and what was it, you know?
Yeah.
And when he had Miss Welty come to visit our school, Hollins, my freshman year, people really hadn't so much heard of her, except Lewis, who had done all the, you know, the major beginning scholarship,
Sure.
you know, on her work. Yeah.
There is a lot of jolly in your book.
Good.
Your Aunt Gay Gay and the club and the trip down the river on the raft and adventures in the dime store. But of course, you've been honest, painfully honest in this book as well. Both your mother and your father had problems which you then used fictionally, and your son as well, which you used fictionally in Guests on Earth. But that's different.
That's different.
This time you bore right down and talked about
my father,
your father and your
suffered terribly from depression. It was really bipolar, we understand now, bipolar depression. But he didn't even have any fun in the fabled up stages. It was just workaholism for him. And then my mother had anxiety and depression both, and had a whole history of suicide and so on in her family. And both of them spent a considerable amount of time in various institutions. And so this really is my story, but it's not a sob story, because in the kind of town, Grundy, Virginia, where we lived, and the kind of huge extended family that I had, there was always an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, whatever, you know, to take me in, you know, or to give me a ride to anywhere if I needed to go to Girl Scouts or whatever, you know. I mean, it was a really very caring and wonderful community and family. And so it was really lucky. That's the place, I mean, that's the kind of place to be. And but I wanted to write about this because then my own son, my beloved son, Josh, who died 13 years ago, was schizophrenic. And looking back at the family history, that makes, particularly Mama's side, that, you know, that makes a whole lot of sense. But, you know, having dealt with mental illness so much in so many different, you know, with so many different, you know, very dear family members, I just want to talk about it, because I think one of the biggest problems is the stigma that attaches to mental illness. And like back with my mama and daddy, you know, it's like, tell no one. You know, and my daddy for the longest time felt like he didn't even understand that what this terrible thing that immobilized him so completely, you know, every several years was an illness. He thought it was like a character flaw. And I remember something that was really important for him was when William Styron wrote his book, Darkness Visible. And Daddy knew who Styron was because he had come over to Hollins to hear him speak with Nat Turner and so on. And he, you know, he admired him. And so I gave Daddy the book. I think Daddy was in Duke Hospital at that point, even for depression. And I gave him the book. And he was galvanized. He said, I can't believe that a man like this would tell these things. And I said, well, Daddy, you know, it's an illness. It's like arthritis or, you know, anything that keeps coming back from time to time. It's an illness, you know, and that meant so much to him, that book. And so I thought, all right, if I ever write a book about myself, you know, I'm going to write about this because it affects everyone in the family. I mean, Josh's illness affected his siblings,
of course,
my son and my daughter so much, and so on. So I just really wanted to write about these things and to just show this is not something that's happening to other people.
But you did convey.
This is happening to us.
And
2 out of 5 families have a major mental illness in this country, and these are the most vulnerable people in our, you know, in our whole country, and we're not taking proper care of them. And this has become a real matter of advocacy for me.
You have not been yourself a victim, particularly of depression. But if
I don't know.
If you have, you've hidden it very well.
Oh, I don't know. No, I have
But-
certainly taken advantage of medication and psychiatry, upon, times when I really needed it. And part of my message here is that, help is available. The sooner the better. Go get
You
it.
sought help from both Talking Cure and medicines. But there's a wonderful moment in the chapter on your grief
Yeah.
over Josh's death, where your psychiatrist, bless his heart, says you need to start writing. The
Yeah,
therapy
because
for
I
Lee
was
Smith writing.
immobilized. Yeah, I was just immobilized by Josh's death, and I was just like this, and I couldn't do anything. It was just completely non-functional, and all I could do was just scream and cry. And I was wearing out everyone, my husband, my family, my friends, and so I went to this wonderful doctor and screamed at him for a while, and then he gets out his little pen, in his little crabbed handwriting. He says, "Okay, I've got a prescription for you today," and I said, "Great." I wanted more drugs, or anything.
Right.
And he handed it to me, and it said, "Write fiction every day for 2 hours." And I said, "What?" I said, "I can't do that anymore. I just can't do it." And he said, "Yes, you can." He said, "It occurs to me that you have a great gift that most of my patients don't have. You are able to enter into someone else's narrative."
Yes.
Entirely for hours at a time, and I want you to do that. I think it will be a relief for you, a release for you. I think it will be good for you. And I said, "Well, I can't do it." He said, "Well, then just go sit in the chair every day
Right.
for 2 hours." And I thought about Josh, who had benefited so much when he was given the medication that enabled him to live outside of hospitals.
Right.
Vocational therapy, and I thought, vocational therapy, I'm going to do vocational therapy. And I did. I went and sat in the chair, and finally, on the 5th day, I started writing, and I wrote my novel on Agate Hill. So,
You'd given that a shot earlier. You had
well,
just
I had outlined
begun.
it, and
Yeah, good.
excuse me, and I'd done the research because it was a big Civil War novel, and so on.
Right.
But it was also, there was something about it that was just very, anybody who's read any Civil War writings will understand the urgency involved in all those letters written on the battlefield and the
sure.
diaries kept and so on.
Right.
So there was an urgency in the material that corresponded, I think, to the urgency, in my own life. And somehow it was a great mix. And Josh even sort of found his way into the final chapters as a character.
It's interesting that
yeah.
readers who become immersed in a novel they're reading are brought into another world, another dimension of reality. They are helped by being removed from their everyday life.
Yeah.
One does not necessarily think of the writing
Oh,
of the
yes.
novel as the same
Oh,
kind
yes.
of therapeutic immersion in another world.
I think for me, my whole life, I think that has really been true. And I can look back at the things I've written over my life and see what I was thinking. I don't always know what I was thinking till I read what I wrote at that particular period. But it is it's a wonderful gift to us all, whether we're writing just in a notebook or whether we're keeping a diary
Sure.
or whether we're writing a novel or writing a poem or whatever, because the material of our lives is chaos, and to just take that and put it in words, in any order, in a sentence, on a page, is to create an order where one did not exist. And it is an inherently therapeutic thing to do. Sometimes I think that that writing for publication may be the last reason to write, but it has certainly been helpful to me to be able to do this all these years.
It is always horrible what I'm about to do, but I'll do it anyway, since your book just came out this morning, or
Yeah.
so. And yet, the question that I always want to end with is, what will happen next? Will you pursue? Are you going to move to another book of nonfiction? You're going to publish your letters? You're going to write a novel? You work on a collection of stories? What's
Well,
next?
I'm already working on a collection of stories about older people. Not that I know any, of course, but not that we would.
I hardly know anyone else.
No. But it's named Silver Alert. You know what a Silver Alert is?
I do, because there's one on the highway
Yeah,
today
every time
here.
a geezer escapes from the nursing home with his car and goes down, they put silver alert.
Yep,
Well,
yep.
I was driving home from Florida with my husband last year, and silver alert. And the car that this old guy had was a Porsche Carrera. You know, and we start making up a whole fiction, like, where's he going? Who's with him? You know, etc., and come up with this whole novella. So that's the first one. And I think I
Okay.
want to do a collection of, geezer, silver alert. So we're on the loose,
Septuagenarian
I think.
escapees.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right.
Well, I have always been an admirer of the short stories. I think I've always wished that you had done even more than you have done. So I'm going to be looking for Silver Alert.
Okay. And
Thank you.
other short stories, too. I've done 3 of them so far.
Okay. And when they're ready, I'm ready. And,
Thank
and we'll
you.
sit down and talk again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It's, Lee, as always, a great pleasure.
I can't believe the time goes so fast every time I'm here. We're talking to you.